Making his latest and greatest return to the show, former BYU quarterback and BYU Sports Nation favorite, John Beck. John, you recently signed a deal to play for the BC Lions in the Canadian Football League. How's the real challenge of currency conversion going thus far?
I'm learning about it. I had my first experience when I went up there about a month ago, so I'm learning all the things that kind of are part of Canada and being a person that now spends part-time up there.
Which area has the nicest people, British Columbia or Provo?
You know what? I actually haven't been able to meet too many of the people from British Columbia, so I have to go with Provo.
Okay, fair enough.
How much did you know about the Canadian Football League prior to signing with the BC Lions?
When I signed with them, I had some knowledge. It was probably the year before that, like probably 8 months before that, when I kind of had to start learning, because I couldn't have told you a single team up there. But it was in that year that I didn't get on a roster and I had CFL teams that were contacting my agent. I kind of knew, if nothing happens in the NFL, it looks like if I want to keep strapping the cleats on, I'm going to have to go up there. So that's when I started watching the games, especially with Max being up there. Yeah. It was kind of intriguing for me to watch the games while also watching Max and seeing how he was adjusting to the Canadian game, and then having a chance to talk to him on the phone during the weeks, saying, okay, hey, tell me about this, what was going on. That was kind of my introduction to everything. So when I signed with the CFL, I had a pretty good knowledge of it. It was before that when I had no idea.
John Beck, former BYU quarterback legend, and now playing for the BC Lions on BYU Sports Nation. Speaking of Max Hall, John, we've talked to you about his bocce ball experience before, and also Dennis Pitta. And it just so happens we were talking to Dennis the other day about that bocce competition between you guys, and he had this to say about you, claiming that you're a good bocce ball player. Listen to this.
It doesn't surprise me that John would make a comment like that. He's typically a little delusional when it comes to his abilities.
How do you respond to Dennis Pitta, John?
Well, first off, I don't think I've ever played bocce ball with Dennis. I think maybe it was my sophomore year when Dennis was a freshman. So I know I probably smoked him then. I don't know where the other interpretation came from. But, next time Dennis is on the radio, you'll have to ask him about the time that he got dunked on by me up in Montana.
What?
Bring that one up and see how he responds.
You dunked on Dennis Pitta?
You had hops, John, or have?
Yes, just ask Dennis about it the next time he's on.
Fair enough. That's marked down. That's going to happen.
There were some epic bocce ball games. I don't even know what they're called in the IPF back in the day. But
hey, so I do have a question, though.
Yeah.
I can't remember the story of how I got thrown in there. Was it somebody thought it was me that was in that little segment?
Yeah, it was us in March. We were doing the show from Vegas at the West Coast Conference basketball tournament, and we mistakenly said you instead of Max. You're like, well, you're thinking of Max, but I would dominate them anyway. So then
That's right. Yeah, they're lucky that I wasn't in that match.
I love the competitive juices. I want to move to a different topic, one that's in the news, and we'll talk about the NFL draft in a moment, but BYU appearing to be left kind of outside in the conversation of BYU getting scheduled by Power 5 conferences who are like the ACC and SEC. They're going to play 8 conference games, and then against a Power 5 team. BYU not considered one of those teams. Notre Dame is. Your thoughts on BYU kind of on the outside in getting scheduled against Power 5 teams, non-conference games?
Well, I would say my view is that I hope it can change. Obviously, with the viewing power that BYU has of having its game on ESPN, you would think that would be kind of a driving force to kind of get that in the works. I know that, like Notre Dame, they have their TV deal that they've always had, and they have a very prestigious name nationwide. And I do know that when you go on the opposite coast, there are a lot of people that they've heard of BYU, but that's really about it. To them, it's just a place that's out west, and they know it as the Mormon school, and it's not really viewed the same way as a lot of the people out here on the West Coast, even those that live in Pac-10 cities or states, or Pac-12, excuse me, they all know about BYU because it's a West Coast-based team. But back east, they view BYU completely differently, and it shows up in a lot of areas. But I think that might be one of the biggest parts. Who are the people that are making the decisions? Are the majority of them teams that are East Coast, Southeast, whereas the only power conference that you're bringing in is probably the Pac-12 conference as far as when you draw that midline through the states. I know there's some teams that are part of the Big 12 that are going to be considered that conference, but a lot of those Big 12 teams are kind of Texas and then East, because you dive over into Missouri, you dive into those other states. So, it's probably a tough spot for BYU to be in. I think if they can continue to have good years and continue to have a recognition on the national level by their games being viewed nationwide, I think that can change things. So I think where it stands right now, you'd like to see them in now, but I think if they continue in the right direction next week.
John Beck on BYU Sports Nation, former BYU quarterback, now playing for the BC Lions, about to get his season underway. You brought up just winning games and staying relevant that way, John. What else besides winning can BYU do to kind of press the issue about being included in that Power 5 scheduling agreement?
Well, I think first and foremost, it has to be the winning. Outside of that, there's a lot of things that you can try to do, but it's going to take having some big-time seasons with some double-digit wins, with wins over top-quality opponents. I think getting opportunities to be invited to big bowl games and winning in them. Because I think everybody knows that BYU travels well to bowl games. I think everybody knows there's a national following. That's why we have the ESPN deal. That's why we have Nike, because there's a huge national following. People already know that. But I think that those other conferences, that they may view things differently, or they may view BYU as not quite the Notre Dame. It's going to take stepping up and winning some of those big games and really doing it in a fashion that says, hey, we want in. Not we want to sneak in, but hey, let's put our foot down and we want in on this thing.
John Beck is on BYU Sports Nation. I think a couple of factors go into this as well. The fact that Utah went to 2 BCS games and is up the street. I think BYU fans are a little antsy about not only Utah being in the Pac-12, but the fact that they got nationally relevant at that level. 11 wins was really good. Like what you did in 2006 was really good. I think 12 and 13 kind of changes the conversation too. Does BYU need to have that kind of season with a marquee win or two to kind of get in the next level of conversation?
I think it would. I often look back at that 2006 season and think, holy cow, we were just, a field goal and against Arizona, they called back a touchdown on us. I mean, we were so close to being an undefeated team, but I often wonder, had we gone undefeated that year, would it really have changed anything? Because Boise State had started out the polls so much higher than us, and we were playing on the mountain. Like, who was going to see any of those games? I know that, ESPN, the play that I tweeted Johnny at the Utah game got, top play of the Saturday, but how many people really had an opportunity to see that play? Not a lot of people because of the mountain. So I think that right now BYU's in a good situation because of their deal with ESPN, but it probably is going to take a Cinderella-type season. And then now with this playoff, I mean, a huge thing would be if BYU could get invited to the playoffs.
Yeah, bigger than getting into the BCS. That would be bigger.
Yeah, that would be something huge because now all eyes, it's going to be just like the NFL playoffs. I don't care a fan of what team you are. When the NFL playoffs are going on, every NFL football fan is watching every single one of those games. And, college bowl season, who watches every single bowl game? Nobody. But NFL playoffs, if you're a football fan, you're watching as many games as you can. You watch, Wild Card Weekend, you're watching everything. So I think that if BYU can get their name in that showdown, that would be huge.
John Beck, a second-round pick in the 2007 NFL Draft by the Miami Dolphins. You just watched another BYU guy get drafted in the second round to the Detroit Lions, Kyle Van Noy. And now there's this side topic of, speaking of national prominence, BYU's only had 2 draft picks into the NFL in the last 4 years. How much do you read into that and the fact that they haven't won games, and how does that all tie into establishing your program as one of the national powerhouses when you only have a few NFL draft picks?
Well, the draft is kind of a funny deal. I know that a lot of times teams, they do view the athletes that come from the SEC schools, the Big Ten schools, they view them differently because there's always that topic of level of competition. Well, the level of competition was different. Well, these guys are going to be more NFL ready to step in because the level of competition. That's always thrown around out there. I think that does at times hurt players from BYU trying to come out. Obviously, there's times like with somebody like Kyle, who had gained recognition early in his career, was being recognized going into his senior year, I saw something that the Detroit Lions said. One of the things that jumped out to them was when they were recruiting, or not recruiting, but when they were watching tape of Ziggy last year, that Kyle was just jumping out at him. So they had previously taken an interest in Kyle, even before Kyle was coming out in the draft. Things like that have to happen for a player to get drafted. And you'd be surprised as well, some of those players that are drafted in the later rounds, some of them have connections to people on the staff or on teams, or somebody knows this person. And what happens is they don't want to wait around to take a chance and possibly not get them in free agency after the draft ends. So they use 6th and 7th round picks just to make sure they get a guy. But really, once practice starts, there is no difference between a 6th, 7th round pick or an undrafted free agent. So it's a little bit hard to say the whole draft and how big of a deal it makes to be drafted. I think when you're an upper round draft person, it definitely makes a difference, but the lower ends, it doesn't as much. I think BYU, if they can start getting in that topic of conversation, being recognized as a school that is a powerhouse, it'll definitely help, because you look at some of the schools that always have 4 or 5 guys drafted every single year. It's guys coming from those other schools recognized as big schools, NFL-ready players, all of that.
John Beck is on BYU Sports Nation. That's interesting stuff about the 6th and 7th round guys being the same as free agents. I like that. When you look at BYU football and the NFL draft, is that part of the conversation as a BYU football player, that the elite talent from BYU trying to get into the league? Is that part of BYU's football program?
I mean, that's how I always viewed it when I went to BYU. I obviously wanted to go play in the NFL from the minute I made a decision, and you obviously try to make a decision based off of 2 things. For me, I can just show you my experience. One was, what's going to be the best school for me, regardless of football, but for my life as a person. And then 2, I want to get to the NFL. Is this school also going to help me get to the NFL? Am I going to have an opportunity to play, compete, learn the things I need to learn so I can get there? And you try to make a decision based off of those 2 things. And it's hard because sometimes you can put one over the other, and you can put the football thing in front of the life thing, and that's what makes it a difficult decision. But from the minute I walked on BYU's campus, I had a goal to make it to the NFL. So in all my training and all everything, that was my focus. And I had other players around me that were just like that. When we went out and worked, we worked because we wanted to win football games that season. We wanted to improve who we were as a player. And then down the road, we all had dreams and aspirations of going and playing in the NFL. And I think that that's very common at every school, because everybody wants to make it to the NFL. I think that all schools are alike. I think BYU has a very cool thing that Bronco has done, where if you walk upstairs in the football building, you have all those pictures of BYU players that have gone on to the NFL. You have all the helmets of all the NFL teams that have a list of the players' names beneath them who have played for those teams. You have a giant picture of Dennis Pitta, giant pictures of Chad Lewis, of Rob Morris, of all these guys that have gone on and had success in the NFL. So I think Bronco understands that, and he's trying to continue that, saying, hey, we have a legacy here of NFL players, and we can improve upon this. Is it a shame a little bit that BYU has only had that many guys get drafted? Yeah, of course it is. But how many of those guys that get signed later as undrafted free agents are still playing in the league? Vic Soto, I think he's going on his 4th season in the NFL. Well, here's a guy that I don't believe was drafted, but who's put together a career longer than a lot of the people that do get drafted. So BYU's putting good people in there. Would it be great to get more recognition, to get more drafted guys? Definitely. Will BYU gaining more national recognition help that? Probably. Will having guys from BYU pan out help other guys? Yes, it helps to have people that are coming from your school successful when it all of a sudden becomes your turn to come out.
In a roundabout way, winning is the solution to all of this, is it not?
Winning makes everything better in life, guys. It doesn't matter what it is. Losing sucks. Winning fixes everything.
Whether it's bocce ball or football, just win, baby. To quote former and late and great Raiders owner Al Davis. John, always great to talk to you. Good luck in Canada, and tear up the Canadian Football League, man.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John.